I never thought I'd be the kind of person who would stand up to an entire family. Growing up, I was always the peacekeeper, the one who smoothed things over when tensions rose. But sometimes life pushes you to a breaking point, and you discover strengths you never knew you had. My name is Eliza, and until 6 months ago, I was married to Daniel. We'd been together for 7 years, married for 4. I'm a landscape architect with my own small business, and Daniel works in finance. We met in college, fell in love quickly, and built what I thought was a solid life together. Daniel's family, the Prestons, were old money from Boston. His parents, Richard and Margaret, lived in a sprawling colonial home that had been in their family for generations. His sister Charlotte was married to a surgeon, and his younger brother James was finishing law school. From the outside, they seemed like the perfect family, polished, educated, and close-knit. When Daniel first introduced me, I noticed the subtle once-over Margaret gave me, her eyes lingering on my thrift store dress and the tattoo peeking out from my wrist. I grew up middle class in a small town in Michigan, and while my parents had given me everything they could, it wasn't the kind of upbringing the Prestons were used to. Still, they were polite, and Daniel assured me they liked me. "They're just traditional," he'd say whenever I mentioned feeling out of place. "Give them time." I did. For years I gave them time. I attended every Preston family gathering, learned their customs, laughed at their inside jokes even when I didn't understand them. I helped Margaret in the kitchen during holidays, while Charlotte sat in the living room drinking wine. I listened to Richard's long-winded stories about his college days at Harvard. I tried so hard to fit in. 3 years into our marriage, Daniel and I bought a house, a beautiful craftsman with good bones that needed some love. It was perfect for us, with enough space for my home office and a yard where I could experiment with the landscaping techniques I used for clients. The down payment came mostly from my savings. I'd been putting money aside since I started my business, living frugally while Daniel preferred to spend more freely. The first incident happened during our housewarming party. I'd spent weeks preparing, painting walls, arranging furniture, planting a garden that would bloom just in time for the event. I wanted everything to be perfect, especially since the Prestons would be seeing our home for the first time. Margaret arrived early, carrying a large box. "I brought a few things to help you get settled," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Inside the box were crystal candlesticks, silver picture frames, and linen napkins monogrammed with a P. "These have been in the Preston family for generations," she explained. "Every Preston home has them." I thanked her, of course. But when I placed the candlesticks on our dining table, which I'd carefully selected from a local craftsman, Margaret frowned. She pulled out a large, ornately framed photograph of Daniel's extended family, taken at his cousin's wedding. I wasn't in it. It was from before we met. "This should be the focal point of your living room," she said, already moving toward the mantel where I'd placed a piece of art Daniel and I had bought on our honeymoon. I looked at Daniel, expecting him to say something. He just shrugged. "Mom has a good eye for these things." By the end of the night, Margaret had rearranged our bookshelves. Preston men always display their college yearbooks prominently. Suggested we replace our couch. This modern style doesn't suit a Preston home, and informed me that the guest bedroom should be painted blue, not the sage green I'd chosen. Preston guest rooms are always Wedgwood blue. I told myself it was just Margaret being Margaret, that it didn't matter, that these were small things not worth fighting over. Over the next few months, every time the Prestons visited, something in our home changed. Richard brought over his old leather chair, insisting it belonged in his son's study. Charlotte gifted us heavy drapes that darkened our once bright living room. James installed a wine rack identical to the one in their parents' home. Each time I looked at Daniel, waiting for him to notice what was happening. He never did. Or if he did, he chose not to see it. "They're just trying to help," he'd say. "They want us to have nice things." But we already had nice things. Things we'd chosen together, things that reflected us. Not just the Preston legacy. The breaking point came during Thanksgiving. We were hosting for the first time, and I'd spent days preparing. I'd set the table with care, using dishes we'd received as wedding gifts, arranging a centerpiece of autumn flowers and candles. The house smelled of roasting turkey and fresh-baked bread. When the Prestons arrived, Margaret walked straight to the dining room and stopped short. "We're using our wedding china," I explained. "I thought it would be special for our first time hosting." Margaret's lips thinned. "Daniel, did you forget to take out the family china?" "Of course you were," Richard chimed in. "Preston Thanksgivings are always served on Preston china. It's tradition." "We can use it next time," I said, trying to keep my voice light. Today I've already set everything up. Margaret shook her head and opened her large handbag. I anticipated this might happen. She pulled out a carefully wrapped bundle. Napkins with the Preston monogram. At least we can use these. Before I could respond, she was removing my carefully chosen napkins from their rings and replacing them with hers. Charlotte joined her, rearranging my centerpiece to make room for a silver candelabra she'd brought. I looked at Daniel, silently pleading for him to say something. He was watching his mother and sister transform my table, and there was something in his expression I hadn't seen before. Relief. That's when I knew. This wasn't just his family overstepping. This was Daniel allowing it. Wanting it, even. Dinner was tense, at least for me. The Prestons carried on as if nothing was wrong, discussing family vacations I hadn't been invited to, and reminiscing about traditions I wasn't part of. When I mentioned my business had landed a major new client, Margaret nodded politely before turning to Charlotte to ask about her children's private school applications. After everyone left, I confronted Daniel. Did you notice what happened today? Your mother completely took over our Thanksgiving. She replaced everything I had set up. And you let her. That's not what I meant. It's just, there are certain ways things are done in my family. He ran a hand through his hair. Can we not do this tonight? It was a long day. I let it go. Again. But something had shifted inside me. I started paying closer attention to the patterns I'd been ignoring. Like how Daniel would text his mother pictures of our home when I wasn't around, and suddenly Margaret would show up with the perfect lamp for that corner. Or how family heirlooms kept appearing in our house, displacing items we'd chosen together. Or how, when we discussed renovating the kitchen, Daniel insisted on consulting his father first because Prestons have a certain style. I began documenting these incidents in a journal, partly to convince myself I wasn't overreacting, and partly because writing helped me process my feelings. The entry started small but grew more detailed as the pattern became clearer. April 15th, Margaret brought over Preston family photos to hang in our hallway. Moved my graduation photos to the guest room. May 3rd, Richard installed a new mailbox without asking. Said ours wasn't, quote, substantial enough for a Preston home. May 20th, Charlotte rearranged my bookshelf while I was in the bathroom. Fiction is now hidden in the bottom shelf because Prestons display academic books. June 8th, Daniel's cousin sent us a replica of the Preston family crest to hang above our bed. Daniel put it up immediately. The final straw came on a rainy Tuesday in July. I came home early from a client meeting to find Margaret, Charlotte, and Daniel in our bedroom. They were replacing the bedding we'd chosen together, a simple, modern set in soft gray, with a heavy brocade comforter in deep burgundy, emblazoned with the Preston crest. I stood in the doorway, watching as they discussed whether the new drapes they'd brought would match. They hadn't heard me come in. It's coming together nicely, Margaret approved. Now it looks like a proper Preston bedroom. What about Eliza? Charlotte asked, and for a moment I thought someone was finally considering my feelings. The words hit me like a physical blow. I must have made a sound, because they all turned. I couldn't speak. I just stared at them. At my transformed bedroom, at the pile of our old bedding tossed carelessly in the corner. Margaret recovered first. We wanted to surprise you, she said smoothly. Isn't it lovely? These linens have been in the family for generations. I found my voice. This isn't a Preston home, I said quietly. This is our home. Mine and Daniel's. Margaret's smile tightened. Of course, dear. But Daniel is a Preston. And a Preston home has certain standards. Daniel stepped forward. Eliza, don't be dramatic. Mom's just trying to help. Help with what, Daniel? Erasing me from my own home? Making it look like I don't exist? I turned to Daniel. Do you even see what's happening? They're systematically removing every trace of me, of us, and replacing it with Preston this and Preston that. And you're letting them. Daniel looked uncomfortable but defensive. You're overreacting. They're just sharing family traditions. No, I said, suddenly clear-eyed. They're not sharing anything. They're imposing. And you're choosing them over us. I walked out of the room, out of the house, and drove to my friend Maya's apartment. I stayed there for 3 days, ignoring Daniel's calls and texts. I needed space to think, to decide what I wanted. Daniel was waiting, a mixture of anger and relief on his face. Where have you been? I've been worried sick. I handed him a document. It was a property assessment I'd had done, showing the current market value of our home. I want you to buy out my share of the house, I said. Or I'll buy out yours. Either way, we can't keep living like this. This isn't about betting, Daniel, it's about respect. It's about the fact that for years, I've been slowly disappearing from my own life, and you've not only allowed it, you've encouraged it. You love the idea of me fitting into the Preston mold, but I never will, and I'm done trying. What followed were weeks of tense negotiations. Daniel initially refused to consider separating, then tried to convince me I was being irrational. When he realized I was serious, he became angry, then manipulative, then resigned. The Prestons closed ranks around him. Margaret called me selfish. Richard implied I was after their family money. Charlotte spread rumors among our mutual friends that I'd had some kind of breakdown, but I stood firm. I hired a lawyer, documented the financial contributions I'd made to our home, which were substantial, and prepared for a fight. What I didn't expect was for Daniel to eventually deflate. One evening, after another tense discussion about dividing our assets, he sat heavily on our couch, the one his mother had always hated. "You're right," he said quietly. "I did let them take over. I didn't even realize how much until you pointed it out. I've always been the good son, you know. The one who did everything right, who made them proud. When I brought you home, they never said it directly, but I could tell you weren't what they expected for me." He nodded. "Because you were your own person, strong, independent, not easily molded into the Preston way. I loved that about you, but it also scared me. I was afraid of disappointing them, of being different. So I let them try to Prestonize our life." It was the most honest conversation we'd had in years, but it came too late. The damage was done. I couldn't unsee the way he'd participated in my erasure, couldn't unfeel the betrayal. We sold the house. I used my share to buy a small bungalow across town, one with a yard perfect for the Japanese-inspired garden I'd always wanted to create. Daniel moved into a condo his parents helped him purchase in their neighborhood. The divorce was finalized 3 months later. It was amicable, all things considered. Daniel seemed to understand, finally, what had happened between us. In our last conversation before signing the papers, he admitted that he'd never really left his family, never fully committed to building something new with me. The Prestons made one final attempt to assert control. Margaret called me after the divorce was finalized, her voice honey-sweet. "Eliza, dear, I know things ended badly, but family is family. We'd like you to return the Preston heirlooms. The candlesticks, the silver, the linens, they belong in a Preston home." I smiled to myself. "I'm afraid I don't have any Preston heirlooms, Margaret." "Were never mine," I finished for her. "They were always yours, placed in my home without my consent. Daniel took all the Preston items when he moved out. Anything he left behind was ours, not yours." She was silent for a moment. "Well, I'm not sure that's entirely accurate." "It is," I said firmly. "And even if it weren't, I'm no longer a Preston. I never really was I?" After I hung up, I walked through my new home. It was smaller than the house I'd shared with Daniel, but every inch of it was mine. The walls were painted in colors I'd chosen. The furniture reflected my taste. The art was selected because it spoke to me, not because it matched a family crest. On the mantel sat a single photograph, me at the opening of a public garden I'd designed, smiling broadly, surrounded by my team. It was the first major project I'd completed after the divorce, a Japanese-inspired space, with winding paths and quiet reflection pools. The mayor had cut the ribbon, and local papers had featured my work. It was the proudest moment of my professional life. No Preston had attended the opening, though I'd invited Daniel out of courtesy. He sent flowers instead, not Preston roses from the family garden, but wildflowers from a local florist. The card read simply, "You built something beautiful. Congratulations." It was the first time in our relationship that he'd acknowledged my work, without qualification, without comparison to Preston standards. Too little, too late, but I appreciated the gesture. 6 months after the divorce, my business was thriving. Word had spread about the public garden, and I had more clients than I could handle. I hired 2 assistants and moved my office from my home to a small commercial space downtown. Maya convinced me to join her for drinks one Friday evening to celebrate a particularly lucrative new contract. We were sitting at the bar when I felt someone watching me. I turned to find James Preston, Daniel's younger brother, standing a few feet away. Maya raised an eyebrow, silently asking if I wanted her to stay. I shook my head slightly, and she excused herself to the restroom. James took her seat. "I won't take much of your time. I wanted to apologize." He winced. "All of it. The way my family treated you. The way I went along with it." He twisted his cocktail napkin. I saw what was happening, and I never said anything. I studied him. Of all the Prestons, James had always been the quietest, the one who seemed least comfortable with the family's rigid traditions. Still, he'd participated in my erasure just like the others. He sighed. I broke up with someone recently. Someone my parents didn't approve of. I finally understood what it feels like to have your choices questioned, to be made to feel like you're not enough. He looked up at me. I don't know how you stood it for so long. No, he agreed. You shouldn't have. He hesitated. Daniel's different now, you know. Quieter. He moved out of the condo. Yeah. Got a place on the other side of town. Mom's furious. A small smile played at his lips. He started saying no to her. It's causing quite the stir at family dinners. I wasn't sure how to feel about that information. Part of me was glad Daniel was finally standing up for himself. Another part wondered why he couldn't have done it when we were together. I'm happy for him, I said finally, and meant it. It's not easy breaking free of patterns that deep. James nodded. I'm learning that. He stood up. Anyway, I just wanted to say I'm sorry, and that I admire what you did. It took courage. After he left, Maya returned, full of questions. I filled her in, feeling strangely light. James's apology hadn't erased the hurt, but it had validated it. Someone from inside the Preston circle had finally acknowledged what had been done to me. So Daniel's growing a spine, Maya mused. Too bad it's a few years too late. For him, maybe, she said, protective as always. You deserved better from the start. She was right. I had deserved better. And now I was creating it for myself, one day at a time. The following week, I received an unexpected delivery at my office. A small package wrapped in simple brown paper. Inside was a leather-bound sketchbook with my initials embossed on the cover. The note read, "Found this while cleaning out some old boxes. Thought you might want it back, D." I recognized the sketchbook immediately. It was from our first year together, filled with designs I'd drawn for our someday home, the one we'd talked about building from scratch, designed exactly the way we wanted. The home that would be truly ours, not a Preston home or an anyone else home. Flipping through the pages, I saw my younger self's dreams laid out in careful pencil strokes. Open floor plans, walls of windows, a studio space for my work. None of it had materialized in the house we'd eventually bought, the house that had become a battlefield for my identity. Tucked in the back was a sketch I'd forgotten about. A garden design with a small note in the margin in Daniel's handwriting. Perfect. Build this someday. It was dated from before we were married, before the Preston influence had fully taken hold. I closed the book, feeling a complicated mix of emotions. Nostalgia for the people we'd been. Sadness for what could have been. But mostly, a quiet certainty that I'd made the right choice in walking away. That evening, I sat in my garden, the one I'd designed myself, for myself, and thought about boundaries. Not just the physical ones that separated my property from my neighbors, but the invisible ones that define who we are and what we'll accept. For years, I'd allowed my boundaries to be crossed, erased, redrawn by others. I'd shrunk myself to fit into spaces that were never meant for me. I'd silenced my voice to avoid rocking the boat. My phone buzzed with a text from Maya, dinner tomorrow? The new Thai place? As I set my phone down, I noticed a moving truck pulling up to the house across the street. New neighbors. I watched as a young couple emerged from a car parked behind the truck. They stood arm in arm, surveying their new home with excitement. I remembered that feeling, the promise of a fresh start, a blank canvas. I hoped they would fill their home with things that truly reflected them, not what others expected. On impulse, I went inside and gathered a small housewarming gift, a potted plant from my garden, one that would thrive with minimal care. I walked across the street and introduced myself. "Welcome to the neighborhood," I said, handing them the plant. "I'm Eliza." "Thanks so much," the woman exclaimed. "I'm Jen, and this is my husband Mike." "That's so thoughtful," Mike added, taking the plant. "We could use some life in there. The place is pretty empty right now." I smiled. "Empty is good. It means you get to fill it with exactly what you want." Jen nodded enthusiastically. "That's what we're excited about. No one telling us what to do or how to decorate." "Mike's mom already tried," she added with an eye roll. "She sent us a whole Pinterest board of suggestions." I felt a surge of admiration for this young couple, already setting boundaries I'd taken years to establish. As I walked back to my house, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The Prestons had tried to erase me, to mold me into something I wasn't, to make me invisible in my own life. For too long I'd let them. But I wasn't invisible anymore. I was Eliza, landscape architect, homeowner, creator of beautiful spaces. I had built boundaries strong enough to protect me, yet permeable enough to let in the right people. And I was seen. By my clients, who valued my vision. By my friends, who loved me for exactly who I was. By myself, finally and completely. That night, I took the sketchbook Daniel had returned and placed it on my bookshelf. Not hidden away like a shameful secret, but not displayed prominently either. Just another chapter in the story of my life, acknowledged, but no longer defining. Then I opened my laptop and began sketching a new design, a garden for my backyard, with a small studio where I could work on rainy days. It would be exactly what I wanted. No compromises. No erasures.